Thank you to Agri SA for the privilege to join you this morning, and thank you for bringing our attention to the importance of agriculture in any democracy and any ecosystem that is designed for human survival. Before we start the event, it would be a good thing to pray. I thought about reading a verse from the Bible. I decided against it. Instead, I decided that I would start with reading for you a poem penned by a Christian in America in the 60s during the time of Jim Crow laws that divided the nation and created so much fracture that James Patrick Kinney was uncomfortable with. He then wrote a poem that is called The Cold Within. The poem reads as follows: 6 humans trapped by happenstance in black, bitter cold. Each one possessed a stick of wood, or so the story is told. The dying fire in need of logs. The first man held his back. Sorry. I need to bring the computer closer. The first man held his back. For the first around the fire, he noted one was black. For on the faces around the fire, he noticed one was black. The next man looking across the way saw one not of his church and didn't bring himself to give the fire his stick of wood. The third one sat in tattered clothes and gave his coat a hitch. Why should his log be put to use to warm the idly rich? The rich man sat back and thought of the wealth he had in store and how to keep what he had earned from the lazy, shiftless poor. The black man's face bespoke revenge as he passed from his sight. For all he saw in the stick of wood was a chance to spite the white. The last one of the fallen group did not accept for gain, giving only to those he gave. Giving only to those who gave was how he played the game. Their locks held tight in death's still hands was proof of human sin. They didn't die from the cold without. They died from the cold within. How wonderful it is that we have this conversation today with Agri SA, a group that made sure during COVID-19 that we did not die from the cold within. Can we take a moment of silence to pray to God, whatever name you give to him? Amen. The poem I just read was written by James Patrick Kenny, and it was a poem that was seeking to galvanize Christians across America at the time to live their lives with an understanding of the interconnectedness of humanity, that what happens to the next person is bound to affect me. That is the same thinking as Sub-Saharan's philosophy of Ubuntu. I am because you are. Together, we are destined to survive whatever affects or afflicts us as humanity. If I harm you, I harm myself. If I help you, I help yourself. We saw some of this during COVID-19, and that's why we are living to tell the story. But there are other things we learned from COVID-19. We learned about the importance of agriculture in any nation. Not only though did we learn about the importance of agriculture as an economic activity, we learned about agriculture as important for food security, for sustenance, for nutrition, and many basic needs of humanity. I'm not sure whether you learned this, but at Stellenbosch University, in the social justice chair, we established an initiative called the Social Justice COVID-19 Policy Monitoring Alliance, SCOPRA. And it was meant to look at how regulations and other policies that governments created impacted on humans. One of the things that emerged was the need for policies that have a human impact awareness as well as an environmental impact awareness. And from agriculture, the greatest lesson was how important agriculture is to our economy. But secondly, how important it is to have sustainable agriculture throughout the country and in all localities. Because when there was lockdown and certain communities were closed off from neighboring communities, it became difficult for certain communities to survive because their ecosystem did not have basic nutritional provisions. So that for me was a lesson around agriculture. It was also for me a lesson about how regulations encourage agriculture to prosper. I remember during my days as the pub protector attending a course under the Land Development Act. We found that a whole lot of owners of land were pivoting into developing conference facilities, human residences, etc., because they found that agriculture was not profitable. I was amazed when I came to Stellenbosch to find that they hadn't made a choice between money and residence and food security, that they had been able to redesign the spaces and repurpose them for both residential purposes and conferencing, as well as on the other side, a continuation of agriculture. But if we never really knew how important it was that every local ecosystem, both at national level and at ward level, needs some basic agricultural system, then the COVID-19 situation taught us that lesson. So what does that mean, though, for how we move forward? There are about 6 lessons that I would like to share with you. The first lesson is that it's important that all regulation is human impact conscious, as well as environmental impact conscious. The world is converging right now to look at climate change. There's nothing we can do about our past wrongs, but we can do a lot about making the future right by taking actions that remedy the mistakes we've already made and make sure we don't make the same mistakes. I think it's the same thing when it comes to human impact of policies. There's nothing we can do about what happened before COVID-19 or what happened during COVID-19, but we can make sure that future policies have a better consciousness of human impact and that they do 2 things. One is do not exacerbate existing human suffering, but secondly, even improve on pre-existing human suffering. And where do we get the playbook for that? The playbook for that comes from our Constitution. We have one of the most celebrated constitutions in the world. Our Constitution enjoins us to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. It further talks about that society becoming a society where everyone's potential is freed and life improved. This includes people who live in agricultural spaces, whether as owners of those spaces or as workers in those spaces. It also includes people whose land was taken away, who today need land for subsistence and commercial purposes. But it also includes me, you, and everyone else who just need to be resilient, to be self-sufficient, and to meet the rest of society on equal terms so that together we may rise. So that responsibility falls on government. But another thing that I learned on COVID-19 was the importance of recognition. The early stages of COVID-19 regulation were blind to the impact of those regulations on agriculture, on humans, and on food security ecosystems. But recognition helped because the agriculture community was able to engage with government on equal terms and the changes were made. But sadly, that recognition was not extended to women such as Manto, whose story I told a few weeks ago, who was just a small-scale farmer in a village and a domestic worker at the same time. When these regulations were passed, she had cabbages that she needed to offload to the nearest tuck shop, but government regulations did not allow tuck shops to operate and did not allow commerce other than digital commerce to take place. And as a result, she lost on 2 fronts. One was she lost when it came to the cabbages because they became rotten. She also lost her job as a domestic worker because Sarah, the woman she worked for, also had to leave work and stay at home because her children could not go to preschool. And those children who couldn't go to preschool could not also be looked after by Manto because Manto was not allowed to come to the city because at the time domestic work was not recognized as an essential service. So one of the mistakes was that our government, like many others, in their wisdom, not malice, dichotomized the challenges we faced into just 2 things: livelihoods, which is commerce, the economy, and health, which was the impact, the health impact of the pandemic itself. The space in between, which is about social life, which is really the major reason we exist as society, is social life, was forgotten. Hence education suffered, hence childcare suffered, and food security in small localities suffered. Again, I'm not suggesting there was malice. I'm just saying human conscious blind policy making can leave a lot of people behind. What I also learned was around the importance of representation, which is what happened where Agri SA and other big players got into the system. I also learned, though, about the importance of recognition, which is recognizing the diversity of humans in the ecosystem you are regulating, and the importance of making sure that when you pass laws, that diversity is taken into account, and therefore you look at the impact on each of those groups. Look, older persons, people with disabilities, poor people, rich people, women, men, children, grown-ups, etc. So that's a lesson we learned. There was no malice, but the consciousness was lacking. But lastly, we also learned lessons about restitution. Here, I'm grateful to our government and to governments globally, because they came with these compensation packages, what they called, the TERS and the grant, the 350 Rand grant, etc. So that was great. But there were two mistakes with that restitution. The first mistake was that it came too late. If you pass a regulation that's going to have impact on people, it's important, of course, that firstly, you try to design one that is less likely to have adverse impact on anyone, but more importantly, one that is not going to have a disparate impact or disproportionate impact on a certain group. For example, the regulations had a disproportionate impact on people in villages and people in townships and people with smaller businesses who were not operating online, regardless of their color and regardless of their location. So the restitution was a great initiative, but it should have been implemented and conceived as the regulations were being conceived. The restitution should have been conceived. And it's the same thing as restitution for land that was taken away, for lives that were taken away in South Africa. But that restitution should have been conceived 27 years ago. Sadly, it was not conceived properly 27 years ago. And today we're at each other's throats because some are hungry and poor, and others do not understand why must their lives be disrupted, because there was no proper engagement, there was no proper recognition and representation to make sure that people have voice. It doesn't matter whether they were historical advantage or historical disadvantage. Everyone needs to have voice. Everyone needs to understand why their lives are being disrupted. Disrupted they must be. That's what people said at the social justice conference we had a few days ago, that when you have to conduct restitution, there will be disruptions. But of course, you want to minimize it, you want to keep it within the law, but more than anything else, it has to be done in cooperation, collaboration, and empathy. So with the restitution package, it should have been done on time. But secondly, the COVID-19 restitution packages should have also been disaggregated according to different needs. So much money was set aside and so little of it has been used because, again, the means designed to reach people are failing to meet some of our people where they are. I could give examples, but that is not the issue. But what saved the day? What keeps saving the day I would want to say it's human solidarity and it's Ubuntu, which takes us back to the poem I started with. Despite the many mistakes that we made during the last 18 months of COVID-19, the human factor has been at the center of it all. Suddenly, we realized, like James Patrick Kenning, that we are interconnected, that if we look after each other, we stand a greater chance of survival as a human family here in South Africa, in Africa as a continent, and in the world globally. And that is Ubuntu. But just lastly, this reminds me of a story I wrote about a while ago in the Financial Mail. I wrote about a story of a farmer that I called Farmer Brown. And Farmer Brown was a farmer who won a competition as a farmer for many years. And when he was asked by a journalist, what is your key to success? And Farmer Brown said, the key to my success is that I give the best seeds to the farmers around me. And he was asked, why would you do that? They are your competitors. He said, we are in one ecosystem. If their crop is weak, so will be mine. What does this mean for us as a nation is that if some of our people are left behind, if some of our people lack resilience, if some of our communities, if some of our ecosystems are not self-sufficient, are not resilient, our total resilience as a country will be undermined. We've seen from statistics from the UN and other global agencies that societies where the Gini coefficient is low, Sweden and countries like that, Denmark, their resilience, their ability to rebound from the COVID-19 has been far better. Even a country like China that had made a lot of progress on ending poverty, it found itself resilient. What was the formula? It was about designing resilient local ecosystems. So going forward, I do hope that the spirit that made sure that the devastation of COVID-19 was not worse than it ended up being should continue to carry us forward. But also that the lessons we've learned about where we had hits and where we had misses are going to be integrated as we build better together in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but more importantly, in line with our own great constitution. And I know that we are not going to die from the cold within, because within this room are great people who on their own have been redistributing, collaborating, and working together to ensure that we rise together and become a resilient nation, and the great nation that the architects of our constitutions wanted us to become. It is said that the time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next great time is now. So let's plant a better tree. Even if we don't live to enjoy it, Ubuntu says it doesn't matter. The rest of our communities will enjoy it. Thank you.